Good afternoon. Rishi Sunak has formally entered the contest to become the next Conservative leader and Prime Minister. The former Chancellor says he wants to lead the country with integrity, professionalism and accountability. He already has the required backing of more than 100 fellow Tory MPs and more than double the number publicly backing Boris Johnson. Mr Johnson has yet to declare his candidacy but held talks with Mr Sunak last night. Meanwhile, Penny Mordaunt is also running, but like Mr Johnson, has yet to achieve the required number of backers. Here's our political correspondent, Helen Catt.
3 potential Prime Ministers. 2 of them have now officially said they want the job. The former Chancellor Rishi Sunak has confirmed he is running after getting more than the 100 backers he needs. In a tweet, he said he was standing because he wanted to fix the economy, unite the party and deliver for the country.
I think I am.
Penny Mordaunt had already said she was in the race and is the only contender so far to go in front of the cameras. But she wouldn't be drawn on the detail of the policies she'd pursue.
Yes or no? Do you stand by that? You said it a couple of weeks ago.
I'm not. You're trying very hard, Laura.
Well, you said
her number of public backers trails those of her rivals, but she insisted she hadn't done any deals to drop out.
I am very confident about the progress we are making, and I will say to you that I'm in this to win it. I think it's important for our party. We have a contest. I am very confident about our numbers. And the reason why I am doing this is because I think I am best placed to bring the party together.
Which just leaves Boris Johnson to say what he plans to do. Allies say he will run and insist he does have the numbers, despite the figure of public backers being just over half of what's needed.
Clearly he is going to stand. There's a great deal of support for him, as you will have seen. The system is that the proposer and seconder's names are made public. Other people have a choice as to whether to make their names public or not. But the people who are doing the numbers for Boris's campaign tell me that they have the numbers, so the 100 that is necessary of members of Parliament are there.
Yeah. Another supporter said Boris Johnson had promised to run a tighter ship if he went back to Downing Street. An investigation by MPs is due to start soon over what he told Parliament about the COVID rule breaking that took place there when he was last in charge.
Boris is an amazing figure in our party, an incredible campaigner. He lights up any room. People absolutely love him. And if he was, say, chairman of the party, in charge of our campaigning, he could be an incredible asset. But the problem is, as Prime Minister, we would be absolutely shackled to somebody who was bound to bring us down.
Some of the things that we want to do as an incumbent.
The Labour leader again said there should be a general election to let the public decide. There are worries among Tory MPs that Mr Sunak would not be able to win votes in the same way as Mr Johnson when the next election is called. For now, though, he is the only declared candidate who is certain of a place on the ballot tomorrow. Helen Catt, BBC News.
Well, whoever becomes the next Conservative leader and Prime Minister will have the cost of living crisis at the top of their in tray. This morning was a stark warning from the former Governor of the Bank of England, Lord King, about the size of the challenge they'll face. He said whoever is in power will need to impose public spending cuts or tax rises in order to tackle inflation. Mervyn King said economists had got it wrong by suggesting printing money to support people during the pandemic.
I think all central banks made the mistake during the lockdown period of thinking that they should print a lot of money to support the economy, whereas in fact with the economy contracting under lockdown, that was the wrong policy. And all central banks, not just ours, but the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, are all facing now very high inflation rates of close to 10%.
That was Mervyn King. Well, our business correspondent Mark Ashdown is here with me in the studio, and that was quite an admission, Mark.
Well, it was, yes. He's talking about quantitative easing, of course. You might have heard it as QE. Now, that's when central banks buy their government bonds to stimulate their economies. As he says, it is in effect printing money. Now, it's not unusual. It's happening all over the world, on and off since the last financial crisis. The problem, Mervyn King says, came during the COVID lockdown. Money was going into the economy anyway, in furlough to support people and businesses, but egged on by economists, banks just carried on printing money. That was a mistake, he says, and it helped drive up inflation. Now is the time, he says, for politicians to, in his words, front up. They need to start getting inflation moving down in the right direction. To do that, it needs slow growth over many years, he says, but they also need to be honest with the public about the scale of tax rises and spending cuts that might mean. Because he says there is actually a case now to invest more money into public services because of the damage done by the pandemic. But it looks like we're in for some pretty hefty spending cuts. He warns that could spell a period of austerity, which could be more difficult than the last one.
OK, Mark Ashdown, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Head teachers in England say 9 out of 10 schools will have run out of money by the next school year due to the cost of living crisis. The National Association of Head Teachers says that there could be a £2 billion shortfall by 2024, due mainly to increased energy costs and staff salaries. The teaching profession is calling on the government to stand by its 2019 election pledge to restore education spending to 2010 pre-austerity levels. Catherine Stancheshan has the report.
An unprecedented funding crisis in education as the everyday gets more expensive. That's the warning from many who work in schools, who say the reality is stark. A recent survey indicates the burden of rising energy costs, as well as salary increases, means 9 out of 10 schools could run out of money by next September.
I know of one colleague who's been around his school and taken out all of the light bulbs that he doesn't think are essential. I've talked to school leaders that are not putting their heating on until absolutely necessary. Things like trips and visits and all the extra things that sometimes schools put on are not going to be happening this year.
It comes as 13 education bodies have written an open letter to Conservative MPs, urging them to put the issue at the forefront of their minds when choosing a new Prime Minister. They say current forecasts show a £2 billion black hole by 2024, a desperate situation that will severely impact the quality of education. Steve Chalk says energy costs for the 52 schools in his academy chain have jumped from £26,000 a year to just under £90,000.
We're paying 3 times as much for our energy, even after government support, 3 times as much as we were this time last year. That means we're spending through our reserves. So that situation can't continue forever. You can't do that and survive.
The Department for Education says it's increasing budgets this year and that all schools will benefit from the government scheme to discount energy costs. The National Association of Head Teachers has announced it's balloting members for strike action over funding for the first time in its 125-year history. As the cost of living crisis deepens, schools are finding their financial balancing acts even more precarious. Catherine Stancheshan, BBC News.
Vladimir Putin has congratulated China's leader Xi Jinping on securing his 3rd term in office. His position was ratified at the Communist Party's Congress in Beijing. His re-election breaks with a decades-long precedent that limits the service of Chinese leaders to 2 terms, as our China correspondent Stephen McDonnell now reports.
Xi Jinping led out China's new leadership team, in order of rank with him at the top. It confirmed one of the worst-kept secrets in the world, that he'd remain in power into a 3rd term, and potentially for as long as he likes, barring some unknown upheaval in the future.
China is embarking on a long journey filled with glory and dreams, and the bugle has been sounded.
Again, there were no women on the 7-person Politburo Standing Committee, a group stacked with Xi loyalists. The appointment of Li Qiang as Premier will concern some. He oversaw the disastrous months-long Shanghai lockdown with significant food shortages. Now Mr. Li is in charge of managing the Chinese economy.
I think the appointment of Li Qiang as the premier shows that Xi Jinping is not principally interested in the economy. He's never really been interested in the economy except as a political tool.
China's new leadership faces exploding youth unemployment and a massive property crisis. They also have to generate economic activity while implementing strict zero-COVID lockdowns. Xi Jinping and his team have pledged to tackle these problems with ideological unity and nationalist zeal. Well, many will wonder if that's going to be enough.
Crucially, there are no identifiable successors to Mr. Xi in this group. Yet another indication he could remain in power for a long time. Stephen McDonnell, BBC News, Beijing.
Well, that's it for now. The next news here on BBC One is a little early at 4:20. Until then, do have a lovely afternoon. Bye-bye.